Welcome back to our podcast with Will and Mike. This week,
Your voice is sounds pretty nice, yo. Like, what the
does
fuck?
it?
Yeah,
Well,
you did some like deep shit.
oh yeah, I was trying to do the channel my inner broadcaster
Holy
voice.
fuck, dude. This guy should go you should go learn that thing, dude. You're a professional, man. Holy fuck. I
Oh,
feel like I'm on BBC or some shit.
yeah, I'll give you
You know what
this.
I'm saying? Yeah, that's our intro. All right, dude, let's just get started.
All right, yeah. This week, let's talk about the Taiwan conflict. And many people want to are asking how this conflict will resolve and what the conflict is in general. So, if for those that don't know, uh, China and the Republic of China, or they're sort of two countries before, and now they're both trying to stake claim for the mainland and the island of Taiwan and various territories in the region, right? So we want to talk about like how does this conflict resolve today?
All right. Sounds good. Um this is the defining crisis of our lifetime, right? And I actually don't think it will be solved. Even though people are expecting something by 2030. I think that's the expected timeline. 2030 we'll see a war of some kind. But the overall situation, to give everyone a brief background, is China and at some point fought and took over Taiwan. And when I say China, I mean I think it was the Ming Dynasty or the Qing Dynasty. One of those dynasties took over.
You mean like the Qing Dynasty, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's Ming or Qing. It could be Ming, but I think it's Qing. Yes. So it's got a lot of history, and then it got taken over by Japan, because China lost some wars. China lost a lot of wars during that era, aka the Century of Humiliation, and it was signed over to Japan. And then World War II happened, and then Taiwan was sort of given back to China, but it was given back to the nationalist Chinese, and then the nationalists lost the communists in the Civil War, and then the nationalists fled over there. So, from the Chinese point of view, the Civil War has never ended. So Taiwan is like the last remnants of the nationalist, part of China, right? And that's the whole sort of basis for this like one China principle. And then for the Taiwanese, eventually it became like, hey, we are our own nation, right? After the nationalists fled over there, and they sort of became democratic and proceeded with the status quo. And as they sort of gotten weaker over time, they've sort of relinquished their claims on mainland China. They've never relinquished it publicly or officially, because they know once they do that, that sets the stage for independence, and mainland China doesn't and wouldn't accept that. So that's sort of the political standoff that we're at, right? And then
maybe go deeper on like how Taiwan independence is intolerable to China as well.
Yeah, so we can I'll go through that. So like from the Chinese point of view, right? It's very, very critical to both the government and the people, and I'll separate these two sections. For the government, if they were ever to relinquish Taiwan, so let's say we have some sort of peace deal, heck, China just says, hey, like Taiwan's not that important. They can never say that, because to sell it to the public, it would mean, number one, you lost to the nationalists in the Civil War, right? Or we're going to negotiate peace with the nationalists, which, that the communists can't accept that, right? Like the people can't accept that, because it's, we're not losing the war, right? They'll be like, hey, we haven't lost and we're getting stronger, right? And you'll have this rejection. And the second thing is, and this maybe is a topic on its own, is sort of China as a culture, right? Has been, it's been 1,000 years, or like they tell it to themselves that it's been 4,000 years in the making. And this is a famous quote that I always remember, and it's just that once, I think it was said during the Three Kingdoms era, and it's a kingdom long divided must unite, and a kingdom long united must divide, or something along the lines. And that's been pretty core to how Chinese culture has sort of maintained its identity, right? If you look at the Mongolian invasion, even the Qing dynasty, the Manchu invasion, and the Japanese invasion, China is always united after a long period of division. And in this case, it's part of the Chinese culture to also unite with Taiwan, right? So the people will never accept a government that gives away the Taiwanese Republic, right? So now you have these two caveats sort of preventing peace on the Chinese side, right? You have the government that cannot, because they will become de-legitimized, and you have the people that cannot accept it as well, because it's been in their culture for so long that they have to unite, right? And that's sort of the Chinese identity, right? And they've absorbed external conquerors, right? And people don't say, oh, the Mongolian Empire, right? It becomes the Yuan dynasty, right? They don't say the Manchu Empire. It's the Qing dynasty, you know? In fact, China, the word China comes from Qing, right? And you can debate whether it comes from like the QIN, the first dynasty, but really it comes from Qing, the last Manchu dynasty, right? So that's sort of comedic in that sense, right? And from Taiwan's side of point of view, it's like, hey, we are our own country. You know, you haven't governed us for an extended period of time now, maybe 200 years, since pre-World War One, almost World War Two ish. Like, why should we, you know, listen to you, right? And that's where the conflict sort of starts, right? If there was no Western interference or international interference, China would just invade Taiwan, right? Like this would be a military solution, and it'd be pretty easy, right? But now we have the U.S. in the mix, and the chips.
But we've seen China attempt that before, right? But that, albeit that was a very long time ago, like the first invasions that they did with the Cayman Islands, and like
Yeah.
they were like disastrous for the PLA, right?
Well, PLA just never had a navy, right? So they couldn't really do it. And once the U.S. During the Clinton administration, there was like multiple Taiwan Strait crisis, and Chinese attempted to take back Taiwan with the use of military force and massive military coercion, but it never resulted in anything because at that time, U.S. military was just so much more advanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And U.S. sent a couple of aircraft carriers, and there were many nuances in that situation that were quite interesting, right? There was a lot of betrayal or espionage at the highest ranks, and defections and stuff like that to prevent the so the conflict never escalated, right? But now we're in a different ballpark, right?
Okay, maybe we can circle back on this military option out later. But like, why couldn't China proceed with like a diplomatic solution, like similar to what they did with Hong Kong and Macau? So like Hong Kong was like semi-forcefully reunited, and then Macau was like they're super willing to join China, right? Why can't they give like some peace dividend to Taiwan? It's like, for okay, the next 50 years, we'll give you this peace dividend. We'll bribe you. We'll literally bribe you. Wouldn't that be cheaper than this military solution?
It would, right? And the problem is the younger Taiwanese generation. I don't think they are willing to accept now. You know, they've been sort of brainwashed. You can say that, right? Like, they blame all their woes on mainland China, right? They have this, and it's a symbol of their own economic sort of stagnation, right? You like to blame,
Upward mobility.
yeah. They're sort of stuck, right? And they have this idea that, hey, like it's China's problem, or it's, you know, right? China's infringing on our freedoms and stuff like that. So there's this conflict with the Chinese from the Taiwanese side, especially from the youth, right? And that, that would be that's the ultimate goal, right? Like China's been saying that, right? Like, hey, we just we'll bribe you. We want to settle this peacefully, and it's in China and Taiwan's interest to settle this peacefully, right? And we can go into why that's the case, but the gist of it is just Taiwan will be destroyed, and that will, like, China doesn't really care if Taiwan's destroyed. It's sort of like Ukraine, right? Like China would rather have the land, the symbol. It doesn't really care about the people or the industry that's on there. China
Well,
would like
there's also military strategic purposes as well, right? Even if the cities are destroyed, right?
exactly the land, right? So the
Yeah.
land, the location,
Hmm.
right? And the conflict is mainly that the U.S. has strategic interests in keeping Taiwan, independent if they could, right? They would want Taiwan to be independent. And before we say this, if there was a war, like Kingman Islands or whatever, like the part that's really close to China, that part's gone. So that part's for sure Chinese, right? Like whoever's on there, they're dead. They're dead in within like 2 hours. So like that part, I think any military strategist or war gaming, like, when they do it, like there's no way they can hold Kingman Islands, right? Everybody knows that. So we're just
Okay.
talking about mainland Taiwan here. Yeah.
Okay. Let's say the conflict escalates, but doesn't go to like a full blown invasion. Like, let's say China starts to blockade, like, or some economic coercion, because I think a huge portion of Taiwanese GDP is directly related to the mainland, right? Obviously, because China is one of the biggest economies in the world, and it's literally right next door. Uh, is that one lever they can pull before military intervention?
So I think we're pushing ahead a bit too fast. Like how I picture this playing out, and I want to explain like why we're in the situation we're in. So we start with, okay, so Clinton and Jiang Zemin, CCP at the time, right? They had this conflict and they were fighting over the straits. And Clinton sends in his aircraft carriers. China's like, okay, well, we're not strong enough to take it now, right? But we need to be strong enough to take it in the future. And now you see that Xi Jinping is building up all these forces, right? And the West is quite alarmed. So we're in this like arms race, right? Where the West is accusing China of escalating, right? But China's also accusing the West of escalating, because what happens, let's hypothetically say that China does not build up military capacity, right? And what China is scared of is, let's say in 20 years, 30 years, US can always just say, hey, we'll support Taiwanese independence, right? And if China's military falls too far behind, or China's military doesn't have the ability to fight a sustained war or even take over Taiwan, with a large degree of success, then the CCP loses all credibility, right? The people would be upset at the CCP. They would be like, hey, how can we trust you when you let this piece of land go, right? How can we support you, right? And there will be more radical voices inside China that will call for the strengthening of the military, and the PLA would probably take over the CCP, right? So like the military apparatus would take over the political apparatus if that were to happen. And that's why China needs to build up its military, or is building up its military. It's to prevent what's in their eyes the inevitable conflict that is to come, which is the war in Taiwan. Right. And this is funny because the US is like, oh wow, China's building up its military, right? China looks like it's going to invade Taiwan. It's going to be more and more important for us to defend Taiwan, so we need to build it up. So you sort of see this arms race, and the best scenario, I think, is for this arms race to continue, right? The status quo to continue. And if Taiwan is smart enough and peaceful enough, they just continue to ride the status quo, right? They never want to be too strong where they can say independent, because then some foolish politician is going to, pretend they're like Zelensky and just going to go, hey, time to declare independence, and what happens, right? Like Taiwan just gets bombarded, right? Taiwan just gets decimated. Yeah, they might even, hey, like you might win Taiwan independence, but how much is that worth when your whole country gets short-term ballistic missile to the ground? You know what I mean?
Well, and also long term, you have a adversary right next door.
Yeah, you have a long-term adversary, and you just can't win, right? Like one day the U.S. is going to be like, well, enough of this, just like Ukraine, and then they'll leave, and they'll give you the thing, and then you'll be quote unquote free, right? But
Yeah.
how much is that
Singapore Prime Minister had a very famous quote, I think, like the US is in Asia right now, but I know 1,000 years later China will still also be in the
something like
Yeah,
US is
yeah,
in
something like
Asia
that.
right now, but China
Yeah.
will be there 1,000 years from now, right?
Yeah.
Like China will always be in Asia, whereas US might be in Asia today, but we don't know how long it's going to go. Right? That's the idea.
Yeah.
Right? And I do want to make this clear that once the war starts, or if there's any type of war, right, TSMC is gone. It's 100% decimated, right? Either through US sabotage, right? Accidental damage, or the China might just blow it up themselves, right? If they know, hey, like we're not, if this is your reason for staying in the war, we'll remove this reason because we're not there for the chips. Like the chips is the bonus, right?
But why would China need to blow it up? They can just like turn off the power, like or turn off the water. Right? They don't need to blow it up, right?
Exactly. Well, the factory itself, the fab itself, is so sensitive to any disruption. Basically, you can think of it as a glass house, right, or a greenhouse, right? Like anything that happens, the ground shakes. I mean, it's going to shatter. So they can do a bunch of things, right, to sort of shut Taiwan down and shut so the whole like TSMC argument, or like the chips, so that they can blockade the chips and take control of the chips. That's a moot argument, right? Like for China, this is a existential political like survival, right? Like let's say Xi Jinping just says, hey, like we're gonna give up Taiwan, like we're right, like he gets killed tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like maybe
70 years of diplomacy gone.
No, the day of, he just gets assassinated because like some dude is gonna say, no, we're not gonna give up Taiwan, and the people's gonna rally behind that dude, and that dude's gonna get the power, and he'll rally the troops, and the PLA itself will have a revolt, right? So there is no sort of solution, and you can say, oh, we can do a regime change in China. Good luck with that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not gonna happen. Right? You can do a regime change. And the thing is, if you do a regime change, I don't think the regime change, the person that replaces Xi Jinping, is going to be less hawkish on Taiwan. If anything, he's going to be more hawkish on Taiwan, because he's going to be like, hey guys, this is our goal, right? Like he'll use that as the unifying factor. Why should you listen to me? I'll bring back Taiwan. Right? Like why should you know what I mean? Like fighting an external war has always been the unifying factor, right? What's unified the KMT and the CCP? Like, why did they stop fighting so much? Well, because they had to unite to fight the Japanese, right? Because they're like, hey, we're both Chinese here. So, like, even if you fragment China's been fragmented many times before, right? It's gone through the warlords. It gone through warlord times since the beginning. Right, since the beginning, before the unification of Qing, and it's been like that. That's the history. So fragmenting China has never been it's never been an obstacle, right? Sort of to its national unification, right? It's built into every Chinese person. It's built into the culture to unify.
Okay.
And we can go more in depth into why that happens in a future episode. But like to focus on Taiwan, right? That's that's sort of where we're at in terms of you want to just level up the military capabilities on both sides, right?
Yeah.
To continue
So
that.
we went over like China's motivations and why it's existential for them. But, okay, let's go over the logistics of this military uh, feat that China would need to do to take over Taiwan or overthrow the Taiwanese administration right now.
Yeah. So like
Uh,
it's
go ahead.
not in China's motivation, right? Like let me make this clear. So people say this like there's Xi Jinping, right? Oh, he wants to take over Taiwan. He has imperial ambitions. Actually, like if you study him, he does not have imperial ambitions because he survived the Great Leap Forward, and he understands what turmoil is and chaos is. Right? There's no sort of grand plan for him to sort of take China above and beyond, because you need a period of wealth and power to do that, and China's not there yet, right?
So how would you explain the expansion of military bases in the South China Sea then if there's no military imperialist ambitions?
Well, I've sort of explained that, right? They need to have the power and the ability to take Taiwan at a moment's notice. Because let's say Taiwan gets too strong and tomorrow Zelensky happens, right? You get the Maidan Revolution, which I think is what will happen in 2030. By the way, like that's one of the more likely scenarios, right? Like all the people that are holding the peace back in Taiwan, let's say they sort of die off, right, because of old age, right, in 10, 20 years, right? All the KMT people, they sort of pass away, the older generation, right? Then you'll have these youth, and all they know is sort of, hey, China bad, and like, we want to be independent. And let's say they elect a Zelensky who doesn't have the sort of realization that they're beside a tiger, or in China's case, a dragon. But and they do something foolish like that, right? Maidan Revolution, right, with the CIA backing, and then U.S. sends a bunch of arms in. At the end of the day, China's gonna just destroy Taiwan, right? And there was like this thing where it was China can attack the Three Gorges Dam or whatever. Taiwan can do that, but then like what happens? Taiwan gets nuked. Like you eat a nuke, right? Like what's the U.S. gonna do? U.S. not gonna nuke China for that. U.S. not gonna join the arm. Like U.S. can't do anything, right? Right. So the best case for both sides, again, I've stated, is for them to go along, right? Just play the status quo and just play the long game. It'd be peaceful for both China and Taiwan and Japan. Okay, Japan's the only reliable ally that will join this war. Maybe Australia, but Japan is the main one. Okay, Japan might want to fight this. But I don't see how this would be good for Japan either. It's pretty bad for Japan,
So it sounds like you don't think China will invade unless there's like a provocation, like in terms of like a Maidan Revolution 2 from Taiwan, right? So it's in everyone's interest, China's interest as well, to kick the can down the road and just continue building their military.
Yeah, there's no reason for. So before I used to think there was a reason, and there is one reason, and that is if Xi Jinping wants to cement his legacy. And I don't know if we want to go that deep on that, but the gist of it is Xi Jinping put his thoughts into the constitution. He's now the dictator for life. Right? He broke the unpresidential sort of third term. Right? Everyone's allowed 2 terms, but Xi Jinping consolidated power, and he's got 3 terms. And the theory goes, well, what did he do to deserve to have his thought put in the constitution? If you look at the 2 previous leaders that had their thoughts enshrined in the constitution, it was Chairman Mao, right? And he gets the credit for unifying China. And then you had Deng Xiaoping, who brought modernized China and brought China great economic prosperity. He also took back Hong Kong and Macau, right? Unified China, Hong Kong, Macau. And when you compare Xi Jinping's feats to the feats of the 2 great ones, he pales very much in comparison, right? So, but if he unified China with Taiwan, then, hurrah, he is among the great. So that is the sort of principal motivation, you can say, for him to take Taiwan, right? And if you notice, even in this case, whether Taiwan thrives, whether Taiwan survives, and whether CHIPS is a part of it, none of these are the principal motivation, right? The principal motivation is unification. So even if all of Taiwan gets sort of nuked and it's just empty land, but Xi Jinping can say that accomplishes that goal that I've listed, right? For him to validate himself and to get his thoughts enshrined into the constitution.
But wouldn't that be like a huge gamble? Because going back to like the military invasion aspect of this would be like equivalent to like a Mars mission, like how difficult it will be. Probably even harder, because like the water between the mainland and Taiwan is very rough, and the weather is awful. It's like, even though it's only a couple 100-ish miles away, it's not easy to send a giant navy across the ocean and then land, because there's very small parts of landable beaches, and there's also very big differences in low tide, high tide. Like, there's a bunch of like all these military logistics in this. But obviously the Chinese are very they're a modern military now, and they're shown to be competent. It's still one of the greatest feats in military history, right? If they decide to pursue this.
Right. So, okay. So now we're going into military logistics. So what I explained there was, it's why she would do it, right? And in that case, it is a huge gamble. I do agree, right? Can they do it feasibly? Maybe not. Maybe at great sacrifice. But I'm highlighting the sort of reason why he would do it, right? And what his aims are, right? And none of those really involve a grand sort of ambitious, amphibious campaign, right? If push comes to shove. Obviously, at the start of the military conflict, right, China would hopefully take it intact and have all these things. But if those were off the table, the end game, right, for Xi Jinping and for the CCP political apparatus is that we will take it at all costs, even if it's just a piece of land, right?
Because I'm saying the cost, not even factoring the costs to Taiwan. I'm talking about like the cost to mainland and the PLA. Like, it'd be enormous, right?
It doesn't matter though, right? Like if the war starts, right? So right now, of course, we say the war doesn't start and the status quo continues. But once the war starts, it's a do or die, right? Because the leadership, if they fail, it delegitimizes them, right? And people will blame the leadership, right? Let's say the invasion goes badly or poorly, right? The only action, if the leadership wants to survive, is to double down and continue doubling down, right? There's no further action unless they want to commit suicide, right? And the sort of American strategy is to say, hey, we'll make it so costly for you, right? Which is fine, which will continue the status quo. But the PLA and the CCP are sort of gearing up for this, right? And I've explained why again, which is they need to prevent the Taiwan to have the ability to declare independence. Right. So like this
So
whole argument of like a a military invasion, exactly what happens. I don't think until there's sort of a reason that any of those factors I've listed changes for the status quo to not continue. Does that make sense?
mhm.
Right. And we can talk about how future wars are fought and satellites and all these things, how you can supply Taiwan and how Taiwan's different from Ukraine. But until we sort of see critical factors in these reasons for change, then the status quo will remain.
Okay. So it sounds like it's in the interest of like China and Taiwan to keep the status quo because they're directly involved in this conflict.
Yeah,
What about other players? Let's say the U.S. wants to do some meddling and wants to start Ukraine too. Like, or is it even in the U.S. interest to have another Ukraine too?
It's not right now. It's not because the chips are there, right? And U.S. is getting all these chips are there, right? But let's say the chips are not there, or the U.S. somehow does catch up in the chips, and they somehow get all the scientists out. Then yeah, it's in U.S. interest, right? Because why not? Your adversary is spending all this money on war. They're getting all their factories destroyed, right? They're losing all these people, and Taiwan's losing all these people. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like as the U.S., you don't really care, right? It's just like the Ukrainians are dying. You'll be like, it's pretty funny. You see all these people that are like, hey, it's the greatest thing. We can spend the money and deplete the Russians. Right? Like, how does that feel to a Ukrainian? You know what I mean?
They're actually saying overtly too. It's actually kind of
mask
off.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, this is the great thing. Look how much good we're doing. What do you mean? Like, if I'm a Ukrainian, like my country's getting wrecked. My people are dying. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there right? Like, what could we have not stopped the Russian invasion? Like, what's so good about joining NATO? NATO gives us peace, but we could have had peace already, right? Well, like this is another discussion, like because the Ukrainian conflict and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a hot topic, right? But if you're the Taiwanese, right? My argument is this, right? Like you're at peace right now. You're prospering right now, right? You're free right now. What does China do right now to infringe on your freedom? Nothing. Right? Most China can do is some military exercises, stop some trade, right? But if you just say, hey, like we're not going independent, what's gonna stop? Why would China do more? Like China would do more, right? China always does more when Taiwan's like, nah, we're gonna go visit the U.S. We're gonna establish these things, right? So like, why, right? But Taiwan does have to, sort of prevent the dragon from swallowing them, so that they got to do these things. But as long as they keep U.S. interests there and not sort of push it over the edge by giving away their semiconductor advantage and electing a Zelensky, then they're fine. It's more on the Taiwanese people. I think the Taiwanese people have much more control of the situation, just like the Ukrainians did, right? They had much more control of the situation. But the political elite, like we see in Ukraine right now, like Zelensky, let's say he were to sort of give in to Russian demands and all these things, he'd get executed, right? Like he wouldn't survive. So I'm worried that if they elect a Zelensky type character in Taiwan, that person doesn't survive it either. You know what I mean? So then he's forced to keep the war going. So they just need to prevent that type of situation from happening.
Doesn't China have like spies and stuff in Taiwan? Can't they like do some meddling, CIA type of or Mossad level meddling in their elections and their stuff?
I'm sure both sides are meddling, right? Like this idea that China meddles, and dude, the U.S. has the CIA has the biggest budget. Like, who do you think meddles more? You know what I mean? Like, do you think is more adept at meddling? The
Yeah,
CIA or some dumbass Chinese person, right? Like who can't speak proper English, right? Who doesn't have the backing of Hollywood. Like, come on,
oh,
man. You get to see like the PR
well,
campaign.
I don't know. I feel like a lot Chinese propaganda arm is actually pretty adept now. I feel like you look on YouTube comments, like when there's any video that briefly mentions China, all the comments instantly praise China, like
Yeah, but
immediately. I'm
yeah,
like, where are all these people? People normally don't comment like this.
yeah, but you know that. But the fact that you know they're bots means they're bad.
But most people don't know they're bots. I because I watched enough videos to recognize these are bots. But like at first, I was like, oh, okay. There's a lot of
Like,
people praising
well,
China.
here's the thing. I don't know, right? Like, and like these propaganda efforts, like, are getting more and more sophisticated with like AI,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't know if you saw this, but like some AI was like, hey, we some AI company was like, hey, we took over Reddit. We like went on this subreddit. We like did all this research and tried to convince people that these AIs were not real, and people actually believed it, right?
Yeah,
So like, here's
astroturfing.
right, and these efforts will sort of advance, right? But you know, as an observer, like if you look at the Ukrainian conflict, the key was that Ukraine really wanted to strangle Crimea, and Russia. That's why Russia was so important for Russia to get the land bridge, right? And Russia would never give up Crimea. Like that's a hard line, right? So, in sort of Taiwan just needs to recognize that, right? They'll have a hard line, which is, hey, you can't be independent, right? And you can say, hey, it's our right to be independent. It's our to be independent. Sure, right? Then we'll fight. Then there will be a fight, and like and you'll be like, yeah, it's a freedom. We'll die for it. But really, like, should you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of dumb. It's kind of dumb. Like, it's like, I must fight Mike Tyson. I don't care, But like, hey, there's 5 minutes before the police gets here. You know what you know what I'm saying? Like, he's gonna punch your face in. You'll end up in the hospital, and maybe Mike Tyson gets put in prison. Maybe he goes on trial, but for those 5 minutes, you know what I mean? Like, or you could just say, hey, like, all right, Mike Tyson, you do your thing. I'm sorry, like, whatever. I'll go live on my day. Like, I'll just walk on the other side of the sidewalk. That's probably the wiser decision. And that's probably the decision I would argue all small countries should make. And it would be best if you walked with, maybe like Evander Holyfield, as walking behind you. In this case, that would be the U.S., right? Right. And if Evander Holyfield tells you, hey, like, go fight Mike Tyson, I don't think you should do that. Like, yo, go fight Mike Tyson. I'll come back. I'll back you up. Like, if he punches you, like, dude, if he punches you, I'll come beat him up for you. Don't worry. But like, dude, you still got to take a punch from Mike Tyson. I don't recommend.
So like, does Taiwan really have a say in this issue? Then they don't. They other than just kick the can down the road.
They do, right? They have the most important say,
Uh-huh.
right? Which is, hey, we'll never declare independence, right? Anytime that, right, the Taiwanese have that power, right?
But they can't do that. If they say we'll never declare independence, then there'll be like the umbrella revolution, right? Like similar to Hong Kong, like you have like millions on the streets protesting, right?
Hong Kong's a bit of a different situation, right? Right.
How so? Wouldn't Taiwan be a more extreme Hong Kong?
Exactly. So there are two things. Number one, Hong Kong's unification was, number one, inevitable, right? And they wanted a system that was outside the CCP, right? They wanted a system outside CCP, which China promised, right? But once
I argue they didn't really fulfill.
They didn't really
right?
promise. It is what it is.
They promised, but they didn't really.
Yeah,
fulfill,
it's in quotations. You know what I mean? It's a quotations promise. But like, what do you think happens? You know what I'm saying? Like, the people that think that actually believe politicians, like, come on, bro. It's always to kick the can down the road. All right. Like if oh, that's not fair. That's not fair. I'm sorry, bro. Like that's dude. Dude, if I counted every country's broken promise, U.S. broken promise, France broken promise, British broken promise, Chinese broken promise, bro, I'd be counting for the rest of my life, right? But you got to realize it for what it was, right? And you can say, hey, right, what happens if there's an umbrella revolution in Taiwan? That's what I'm worried about. That's what I'm worried about. Because what exactly does Taiwan gain from independence? Do they get richer? Do the people's lives get better? Do they get more freedom? The CCP isn't involved in the day-to-day of Taiwan right now. Where's this like imaginary, like, hey, CCP is going to take over? You know what I mean? Whereas like Hong Kong, it's a bit different because the CCP was going to take over. You
They'll turn off the taps.
Yeah,
Turn off the taps.
yeah, right. The CCP could just right, and that's why nobody was like, "Oh, let me help Taiwan. Let me give stuff to give stuff to Hong Kong." Nobody's could do anything. You know what I'm saying? Even if you gave everyone in Hong Kong a gun, dude, China controls the water, the electricity. Like, what are you gonna do? I'm gonna black out your country. Then we're gonna barricade it. And we'll let you starve. You know what I'm saying? Like there's no military, right? Like, and that's why Hong Kong was given up to China. Right? Like Britain signed this thing because they were forced to. Like Deng Xiaoping said, like, hey, if you want to go independent, we'll invade. What are you going to do? Do you want to send troops? Do you want to fight this war? And Britain said no.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't fight it then. They're probably weaker than they are back then. Right? Like they were weaker now. Right?
They have a standing army of 75,000 troops.
Yeah, okay, whatever it is, right? And they could send it all to Hong Kong, and they will all die in Hong Kong. Like there was no military solution, right? What's the U.S. gonna do? Land in Hong Kong, and then what? Right? Like there's nothing they could do. Taiwan's a different story. China's not involved, right? So like, how do you keep China from not being involved? Oh, just say, we're not gonna be independent, right? Like there's a difference, right? There's a difference. Right. And what's the difference between Ukraine and Taiwan? People like to say, oh, well, people are looking at Ukraine and they're looking. Well, here's the thing. Ukraine first of all, they said we're not going to lease Crimea to Russia. We're going to join NATO. We're not going to release Crimea to Russia. And then I think the most egregious thing they did was they built a dam to prevent water from going to Crimea. Right? They dammed this river. So then Russia had to build the land bridge, right? And the land bridge clearly was not economical enough, right? So why do that? Why do that? Right? That's like saying, hey, we're going to start putting military installations on Kingman. Right? We're going to start blockading Chinese ships. You know what I mean? We're going to start doing things around the island to restrict Chinese ship access. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to get smacked, right? But if you don't do that, right? Let's say Crimea, you just sort of, hey, we'll keep leasing Crimea to you. Like, we won't join NATO, even though we could, right? Like, it's quote unquote within our right. I don't think Russia would have invaded, right? Let's be honest. What's in it for Russia? Right? There's not much. Right? There's like all this stuff like, oh, well, they're afraid of like Russian.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize military intervention is like the most expensive thing you could do. It's like a failure of like
multiple levels. Exactly.
Multiple levels of policy.
Right. And like if you and the Chinese are studies of the art of war, right? Sun Tzu wrote this book like thousands of years ago, right? And war is one of the last resorts. You want to do everything before you go to war and before you go to sieges, right? Because sieges are costly, right?
Like even if you win the battles, you have to like annex them, administer them. Like you don't want to waste your standing army administering a area you don't really care for.
Exactly, right? And I think China knows this, right? It's like China's been united for so long. And this is like a different topic, right? Like we can do a topic on Chinese culture, but I'll briefly touch on it. Is why did Mongolia become China? Why did Manchu become China? because the Chinese way of administrating China was the most successful. Right? The Mongol Empire, once they expanded to China and took over all of China, where was their capital? Their capital was in Peking. Right? You can say it's whatever the Mongolian steppe capital, and I think Genghis Khan had it, right? But after that, it was in Peking. It was in Kublai Khan. So, right, the power went to Kublai, right? So, and same with Manchu, right? They didn't go back to the steppes. They stayed in Peking. So it's like,
I think there's a saying like when the barbarians like kill all the city people, they eventually become the city people themselves.
right, they become civilized, right? You civilize the barbarians, right? But anyways, we sort of drifted off topic. This is a big topic, many cultural issues, but the idea that like Taiwan has a lot of gain from independence, right? The only thing to gain is maybe you don't go to conscription, all right? The youth, they don't have conscription, but all these problems that let's say Taiwan were to magically become independent today, right? They don't get solved. Their people are still going to suffer. You know, economic equality is still going to be there, right? Upward mobility, the lack of upward mobility is still going to be there. Long working hours, still going to be there. General unhappiness, unease, frustration at the financial institution, the government, still going to be there. Right? So this is just an idea for them to take the frustration out. Right.
Okay.
Right?
Let's just summarize this. What's the likely or base case scenario of this conflict?
I think by 2030, we'll start to see signs of a Maidan revolution in Taiwan. You know,
that's the base case. That's your base case.
I think so.
What would bear case then? That's your base case.
No, we should pay attention to this.
Okay.
Right? Like that's when I'll start getting sort of worried. You know,
I'm saying like if that's your base case, then what's the bear case?
Because by 2030, it'll be in the U.S. interest to go to war, to have some sort of conflict, right? And China's ready for it, and China's also said it. Hey, we need to get ready by 2027.
But isn't China more military capable at this moment than the U.S.? Because the U.S. has depleted a lot of their arms reserves, and like they're not ready for war right now. But China is more ready and is right next door.
The thing is, China doesn't need war. Like, think about it. China can do all this through peace. Like, as China develops, right? Like, why take the gamble? It just doesn't make sense to me. You know, like I already gave you the only reason I can think of, which is for Xi Jinping to cement his legacy. But he also risks, you know, sort of the famine and all of that pain that he went through when he was young. Right? So he survived the Cultural Revolution. He did all of these things to get him out. He saw the great reforms of Deng Xiaoping and all of that, and he's climbed his way to the top of power. Right? But he knows what that situation is like, so he doesn't want to go back there.
Okay. What's the bull case in this conflict? What's the best case scenario?
The best case scenario is Taiwan doesn't elect an idiot. And they don't give away they don't get forced, you know, TSMC doesn't get forced to give away their stuff, which is happening, right? Oh, and the other thing we never touched on is like, what's Japan's role in all this? But
yeah, I don't think we have time to cover that today. Maybe another time.
This is a very, you know, sort of big conflict, and we actually glossed over a lot of nuances, right? Like there's a lot of considerations, and maybe we should do like a deeper dive at some point. But that's the best case. You know, the worst case, we see a Maidan revolution, and then you know, Taiwan gets wrecked, TSMC gets sort of blown up. You know, so I would short TSMC going into 2027.
This is your expected case.
Huh? This is one of the other cases, right? I don't see any other sort of case, because even if let's say Xi Jinping dies, he gets replaced. The next guy's going to have the same problem as Xi Jinping. You know, it's not a Xi Jinping thing.
Well, right? Unless the whole CCP collapses, which is, I think that has happened before in history, but like I don't see it happening now. But who knows?
It's improbable. right? It's just
Yeah.
extremely improbable. That's like saying, hey, yo, if Putin collapses. But even if Putin collapses, do you think the new guy coming in is gonna get out of the Ukraine war? If anything, I think that guy would be like, hey, let's go all in on Ukraine war some more. Right? Because he's gonna be like, hey, like focus on, listen to me, unite against the foreign enemy. And we can talk more about Xi Jinping and what, you know, the things he did. Right? Like this whole wolf warrior diplomacy, in my opinion, is one of those things he did to sort of bring more appeal to himself, right? Like, why did he have the power to become dictator? How did he manage sort of to unite the PLA and do all his corruption purges? Right? It's because he's like, oh yeah, China's strong, China's the best, right? Like we're gonna focus on an external enemy, right? And I'm the man to do it. So then it becomes politically unpopular to get rid of him, and whoever's replacing him is like a traitor, right? And that's sort of why he did that, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, that I agree. But I think it was a huge foreign policy mistake. But
I agree with that, and I think maybe but you know, I think maybe it was done out of necessity, because at the time he was facing, right? A lot of people don't talk about this. He was facing assassination attempts, right? There were attempts to replace him within the CCP. So, you know, these things are. It's always something like that. That like a foreign adversary is always better than a domestic one.
Right? It was like when the KMT and the communists united to fight Japanese, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anything, right? The Nazis did the same thing, right? The Spanish did the same thing, right? It's always like, hey, we're a dysfunctional state, but once we fight, you know, a foreign adversary, then, you know, hala, right? Everything comes together.
Right? Okay, so let's just hope they kick the can down the road.
I think they will. It's in Taiwan's interest to do it, and it's in China's interest. It's different from Ukraine, right? It's different from Ukraine.
All right, let's leave it at that.
All right.